Welcome to the Woodturning Workshop. No, I'm not back in the kitchen again, but we're at the shop of Steve Worcester. He's going to show us how he does his hollow turnings and also incorporates slumped glass. It's going to be a fun show. Stay tuned.
The Woodturning Workshop is made possible in part by
Woodcraft since 1928, providing traditional and modern woodworking tools and supplies to generations of craftsmen. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tormek, water-cooled sharpeners with innovative jigs and setting devices. Getting your sharpening done quickly gets you back to the job at hand. Tormek, sharpening innovation.
Well, welcome to Steve's Playroom and Shop. It's nice to be here today in Texas, and Steve, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming in.
Well, first off, how'd you get started turning?
Well, I'm kind of an obsessive person by nature, so I was looking for outlets for my daily frustrations and started taking up wood turning, and then took some classes and then just kind of progressed. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of different professional instructors who have guided me along the way, thankfully very well.
Yeah, well, and I'm looking at some of your work that you have right here. I'm really impressed with your combination of form, color, and you're even using glass now.
Yeah, I started doing glass about 4 years ago or so. I was speaking with some woodturners and looking for ways to differentiate my artwork amongst my peers, really, and decided that glass was really a good outlet. There's several people who are doing a lot of glass or a lot of wood, but not people combining the two on an art level.
It's really nice. It's remarkable looking work. Now today you're going to help us out a little bit too by showing us how you make this, but you're going to be talking a lot about form and hollowing, right? Mostly
hollowing. Well, the glass is kind of a side note here. So what we'll do is we'll go through, I'll show you the basics of hollowing, some of the tools, why we would use one over another, and then we'll go through a hemisphere about that size, maybe a little bit smaller.
Okay, well, let's get started.
Great.
What's the first step?
Well, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to affix the wood to the lathe. What I do is I use a hardwood face block. I use a face plate, and then long screws to go into the waste wood.
Are these special screws, or?
These are actually screws that are used to put together cedar fences. So they have a little bit of corrosion protection, but they're much stronger than, say, a drywall screw or something where it would be very brittle.
Right, because these are pretty thick.
Yes.
I mean, they're not thin, lightweight screws. Right. Okay. And then?
And then what I do is I take my piece of wood, I use a liberal amount of CA glue, an accelerator, and then just push the pieces together with the headstock and the tailstock. Then I round it off on the lathe.
Yeah.
And now we're ready to turn.
Cool. Dude, nice lathe. Is this a little bit of your youth coming out in you still?
Yeah, you have to stay young in your mind.
Yeah, you probably peeled that off your Pinto when you got this lathe, right?
So what I've done is I've mounted a piece of box elder burl in here. And what I do in thinking about how I want the final piece to look at is, for a piece of box elder, for instance, I look at where I want the eyes, whether I want the eyes on the top and the tubes going sideways or vice versa, etc. Right. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and face off the top of this to give me the curve of the top of the hemisphere, the hollow form.
Okay.
So to do that, I want to check my speed, make sure everything's clean here. I'm not going to have any sudden hits or anything. And then I'm just going to bring the tool across the face.
So you're doing a push cut.
Exactly.
So even though it's a burl, you want to use a bowl gouge because it still has some orientation in the grain that helps you with?
Well, the interesting thing about a burl is there's really no defined grain direction. So there isn't really an end grain and side grain, but if the burl isn't really tight, you're still going to have pockets of end grain or side grain.
Gotcha. And so the bowl gouge is the cleanest cutting tool for that because of the small profile?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to face this off. And then come back with a shear scraper.
Really? Okay.
So in this case, if I look at the top of this, I have a little bit of a bark inclusion in the top.
Yeah.
And I don't want that bark inclusion to show up in my work, so I'm going to have to go a little bit deeper down into it. One of the things about burls is you really never know what you're going to get when you get in there. It may be just a big hollow pocket, it may be rocks, it may be any number of things that nature may throw at you, and you just kind of have to go with the flow with it. So let's take this down a little bit deeper and see if we can get out of the way of that bark inclusion.
Okay, doke. Steve, you're turning at an awfully slow speed. I like to crank it up a little bit more than that. Why are you so slow?
Well, really, it's all about tool control. It's not necessarily about speed. So you want to make sure that you're definitely in control. And you really don't have to, with a sharp tool, turn it as fast as most people think.
Yeah.
So now that I'm finished here, Tim, with the fingernail gouge, what I'm going to do is use a shear scraper and go across the top.
Okay.
Now, a shear scraper is a little bit different than what you would typically think of as a scraper in wood turning, in that I don't have a flat top. I instead have a 45-degree ground on each side.
Okay.
And what that allows me to do is just sweep this lightly across the top and take off little teeny bits of material. So all I'm trying to do here is just clean up any of the tool marks that I might have before I go to sanding. What this will allow me to do, though, is use a much finer sandpaper when I get to it and not have so much problems with trying to alter my shape with the sandpaper instead.
Gotcha. You want a tool finish off the lathe to where the sandpaper is just to clean up the fuzz.
Always as clean as possible with the tool. Now, the problem with the shear scraper is that it doesn't have a real big burr, so you have to go back and sharpen the tool quite often.
Steve, I like thin crust on mine.
I prefer thick crust, but
What are you doing?
so what I'm doing now is I'm heating up the plastic so we can make a vacuum form mold of the top of the piece that we just turned.
Okay.
So I'm just a little shade tree mechanics here. I have a homemade vacuum form using the same vacuum pump that I use on my lathe that we'll use later on in the turning.
Sweet.
Okay, so why don't you put that piece down in the center?
Okay. Just like that?
Good enough.
Okay.
Then we just put this on here and we bring up the vacuum a little bit.
Oh, that's cool.
Now we just let this cool a little bit and then we can use that to pour our plaster in later on.
Okay, Steve, we're back on the lathe.
Okay, so what we're going to use now is just a compass. We put it in the indentation that the Live Center made, and we just measure out to the edge. So this is going to be our radius, half the diameter. That's about all the math we're going to need
I
here.
was going to say, you're starting to use math terms.
Yes. So then we take and we transfer that to our block of wood just to get an idea where ideally the perfect bottom of a hemisphere is going to be.
Okay, hemisphere, half circle.
Half circle, exactly.
I'm doing good.
So then I take my compass and just make a template real quick by using that same compass mark and going across a piece of paper and then cutting that out, and we'll use that as a template as we start to cut the back.
Wow, and you're out maybe a penny for the paper.
And since there's 4 corners to the paper, without recutting it, I can get 4 templates out of a single piece.
Not bad. And your wife lets you use the sharp scissors?
Yes, and we recycle the paper scrap.
Well, nice to know that you're green or pink, whichever way you look at it right
Yes.
now. Yeah.
All right. So what I want to do now is bring up my live center in the tailstock and make sure that's secure, and we'll start to cut away some of the edge here and form the back of the hemisphere.
Okay, so it's a little bit of safety in case the glue lets loose.
Right, it doesn't happen often, but then again, once could be enough.
Yeah. And normally you're a little more masked up. You have a full face shield on when
Normally
you
I
turn.
wear full face shield, but it's very difficult for the viewers to hear me.
And to
if
see
I'm
your
wearing
handsome face. Yeah.
Why, thank you very much, Tim.
The viewers wish I'd wear mine more often, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to use that same fingernail gouge
Okay.
and then just start to cut in a little bit. Let's make that mark all the way around though, so I can see it while we...
Nice to know that happens to someone other than me.
Yes.
No.
So we just want to bring that up a little bit.
So you're not going to cut into the glue block too much, right?
No, because I want to keep as much of the platform and stability that the glue block affords me in this case.
Gotcha. Okay.
So all I've really done was just cut a step point, so I know where ideally the bottom of my hemisphere is going to be.
Okay. It's just like parting into the parting tool to mark a spot.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So now what we'll do is we'll use the same tool and we'll start to cut away some of this and form the hemisphere itself.
And so like you were saying earlier, since it's a burl with no real true grain direction, you can go downhill.
You can cut uphill or downhill.
It's beautiful wood. And so you're leaving that little bitty edge there still as an idea, right? Or a marker?
Just some kind of reference point.
Now, a sphere's hard for me to say, is one of the most difficult things to turn, but you're making this half of a ball look easy. How you do it?
Well, I'd like to say that I've made so many that I'm an expert, but in reality, I have to think of it in simplistic terms. What I do is I cut it down into shape and then eventually finish the shape off with the shear scraper, just to clean up all the jaggies and to get the tool marks out and get the piece together.
So will the shear scraper do any shaping?
You really don't want to use a shear scraper for a lot of wood removal because it has a very fine burr that doesn't last very long.
Right. You'll be sharpening all day long.
Right. So then what we do is every once in a while we stop and we put that template up against there.
Oh, you're good. Wow.
I couldn't have done it better if this was a TV show.
Oh, man, that's nice.
So then what we want to do is just progress through it and make sure we actually want to start the arc of the curve at the very top, since this is half of the circle.
And right now it's still a little high right
A
here.
little high there, and then we can clean it up a little bit and take out some of the pick out that you get with burl too with that shear scraper.
Okay. Now, Steve, before we move on to the hollowing, you've shear scraped this, and you also took a specially ground, what, shallow detail gouge here?
It's a detail gouge, and the grind is one that's popularized, if you will, by Michael Hoselick. And Michael's really good at making spheres and balls and things like that.
So this is multiple facets.
It has multiple facets on it, and the bevels are actually used so that you're cutting off of your first bevel, and the other bevels are there to relieve some of the pressure so you don't burnish and heat up the wood as you proceed down into the crevice.
I see, because it fits in there and it's only touching a small amount of surface with the bevel.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, what's this contraption then?
Okay, so this is a captive turning rig, and it's captive because what it allows you to do is, as you're turning, any of the axial force, the down force that would be used from the wood, is basically absorbed into the rig. And yes, this is a complete overkill as far as the rig goes, but this one is a homemade adjustable one that allows me to use anything from this small rig, which will take down to a 3/8 bit, up to my large rigs, which will allow me to turn pieces up to 24 inches deep.
Holy cow. Well, that's nice. Good and versatile.
Yeah, and granted it's heavy, but this is how I get my exercise. I don't get out much.
Well, and what you're saying is, as opposed to having a tool where you're riding the handle and bucking it and you got all that pulling on you, this takes it all out. You're putting it into the machine and into the steel,
Exactly.
and you're not having to exert all that energy into turning. Right. You can focus on shape and whatever you're doing.
Now, there's many handheld tools that'll work equally as well that use armrests or long tool handles like a David Ellsworth would use.
Right, yeah.
So in this case, I have a straight tip. I want to bring it right up to about center.
And I see a red light. What's going on?
And the red dot is a laser that allows me, and it's adjustable, so it allows me to tell exactly while I'm inside the piece how deep the tool bit is.
So it's telling you exactly where that tip is by looking at where it's
hitting on the wood, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so what I'm going to do first is use this straight tip, go in, clear out enough area to clean up shavings, and give the shavings room to expand and pull out. Because even with dry wood, as you hollow out, because you're cutting away the wood, the shavings are expanding, and eventually you're going to clog up the hole, and you need to clean that out.
Gotcha.
So let's go ahead and do a little bit of hollowing here then.
Okay. And there's a specific diameter you want for the hole?
No, nothing in particular really, because in my case, since nobody will see that hole, I'm putting glass over the top, it really could be quite large. Okay. But one of the boasts in wood turning is how small of a hole you can make.
Yeah, exactly.
And still have a hollow and very light tool. The interesting thing is that a collector really doesn't care that much, but the first thing that a wood turner does is put his finger in the hole and see how clean it is.
Well, and the smaller the hole, the less likely that is going to happen, right?
You would need small fingers, exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that looks effortless.
It is pretty easy.
So now I can see by the red dot right here that you're in about 3/4 of an inch.
Right. And what I want to do is go a little bit further down, basically, and you could drill this out, but I just find it easier instead of having to put the tailstock and a drill chuck and all that up. I just use the same tool all the way through.
Well, we were looking back at our video and we noticed that our red dot is actually white, and that's because the red dot's so bright and so powerful that we actually had to shut down the iris. So Brian shut down the iris, and unless we shoot our show like this the rest of the way, we're not going to be able to do anything. So we're going to have a white dot from now on because he's going to bring the iris back up. And Steve, where are we right now?
So what we've done is we've gone through and hollowed most of the inside. And what I do is I set the laser light based on what I want the thickness of the wall to be.
And you are very thin.
Well, and you try not to go too thin because you don't want the inside to meet the outside.
That's a good thing, yeah.
What I have done, though, is I have changed from a straight tip tool to a rounder tip tool so I can get into the tight recesses in the corner here.
Gotcha. Okay.
And depending upon the form, the shape, etc., you may have to go back and forth several times.
Gotcha. Well, now that you have the walls this thin, what does the laser look like?
Well, as we start to hollow, you'll see that the light starts to fall off the edge of the laser.
Sweet.
And so now you start taking very fine cuts to fine-tune the thickness.
Gotcha. Well, and as you do that, you build up a lot of shavings, right?
Yeah, you certainly do, and the shavings will bind the cutter. So you want to make sure that you can get the shavings out of there effectively.
Wait a second. Who you gonna call? Woodturner. What is that?
Now, this is one of my shade tree mechanic tools.
It looks like something from a movie that went after ghosts.
So basically, don't cross the streams, whatever you do. Basically, what I do is I have my air compressor hooked up and the vacuum. So with dry wood, I can use this.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing is pushing air in and using the vacuum to pull shavings out.
Let's see. Oh, I can see them coming back out. Oh. Our buddy Bob Fulton, the genius of the jig, would be jealous of you right now.
So the only difference is if it's wet wood, I can't use this because the air would actually dry out the wood as you're going and then lead to premature cracking and warping. So that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, you never want premature cracking or warping. Okay, what's next?
So now what we're going to do, since we have all the outside turning done, the hollowing done, we're going to reverse it and put it on a vacuum setup so we can take off the waste block and the remaining wood and finish off the back.
Should I even ask?
Well, so we have a vacuum chuck here. We have a vacuum setup. We have a piece of rubber to act as a gasket.
Yeah.
And then we're just pulling air through the headstock via a vacuum pump.
So this is another one of your homemade...
Shade tree mechanic.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, now I understand what it's for. It makes a lot more sense.
Okay, so what I have is a reverse adapter that's hooked into my faceplate.
Okay.
On a live center. I just bring that up there.
Yeah.
Check and make sure everything's clean. Snug it up a little bit.
Wow.
And then it's fairly well centered. Now, with a vacuum, if we turn the vacuum on, I am not going to need the tailstock anymore. So let's go ahead and take off the faceplate.
Okay.
Turn on the vacuum. So what I've done, Tim, is I've brought up the tailstock and I'm going to cut away the waste wood.
Okay.
Now this is poplar, so it cuts fairly easy.
Are you cutting towards the headstock because it helps keep everything together?
That, and I'm a right-handed turner. It's just easier to cut that way. But sure, it's going to be a lot better if you're using, say, a drive center. Then it would be a lot easier anyway because you're pushing the wood into the headstock.
Is that your special grind again on a...
Right, and this allows us to get really close in. Now, we don't want to hang the tool, since it's a small diameter tool, we really don't want to hang it too far off the end here. And because we're using a vacuum chuck, we want to make sure we make very light cuts. Because soon, we're going to have nothing but the vacuum holding the piece on there. So now what we want to do is we've left it a little bulbous. We want to use a shear scraper to clean up the bottom and make the bottom the rest of our perfect circle. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to check and see how far away we are from our real hemisphere shape.
Oh, that's how you find the bottom then.
Right, and since it's a perfect circle, the jig can go anywhere around and it will fit the same.
Okay. Now you were saying a little bit earlier off camera that you leave the bottom a little bit heavy so it balances properly?
Right, because I'm putting a piece of glass on the top and the glass is fairly heavy in comparison to how light the wood is. We want to make sure that I have a little bit of equilibrium amongst the piece.
Gotcha.
Because if the top is all the weight of the glass, then what's going to happen is as you spin it, it would start to tip over.
And you're just shear scraping like you did the outside top earlier,
right,
to get the bottom finished.
Exactly, and once again, we have to take light cuts, in this case especially since we only have the vacuum holding us.
And then from here, when you're done, what do we do?
From here, we'll go to the kiln. Hey Tim, can you bring me the mold?
Well, what was the reason for this suit again?
Well, we just thought you'd look cute in it. We don't actually use that. We use a temperature-controlled kiln. All right, so what we do now with this mold is we're going to pour plaster in it.
Yeah.
High-temperature plaster. And then put it in the kiln with our piece of glass.
Okay, so it's a flat piece of glass that you cut and it fits on there.
Exactly. Okay. So then, at temperature, somewhere around 1250 degrees Fahrenheit, the glass bends down and gets nice and shiny.
And then it matches the curve that's on your turnpiece.
Right, because we made our mold before.
And then you wind up with something like this?
Exactly.
Wow. Now that is a beautiful finish you have right there.
So Since you mentioned finish, what I happen to use is an automotive finish, a clear coat lacquer, just like you would use on hot rods and high-end custom cars.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's probably a whole nother show too.
Oh, at least.
Oh, Steve, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for coming.
It really was eye-opening to learn how to do all the hollowing and everything else. And it's nice to see somebody doing something a little bit outside the box and using a different type of material too. Well, until the next time on the Woodturning Workshop, keep burning,
Turning, Tim.
turning, keep turning.
The Woodturning Workshop is made possible in part by
Woodcraft, since 1928, providing traditional and modern woodworking tools and supplies to generations of craftsmen. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tormek, water-cooled sharpeners with innovative jigs and setting devices. Getting your sharpening done quickly gets you back to the job at hand. Tormek, sharpening innovation.
next time on the Woodturning Workshop.
We're gonna make her a great little toy. It's gonna be a lot of fun, right? Ooh, hi, nose. And as it spins, it makes noise. Parents will really love that. And this takes a very, very fine cut. There will be some vibration, but if you just take gentle, light cuts, see, it's holding together pretty good. That's the way a mower sounds, you're right. Okay, we're gonna make nice straight lines, okay? Exactly.
For more information about the Woodturning Workshop, visit our website at rsupublictv.org.
Steve, you're turning at a really slow speed. I like, you know.
Hang on, he was laughing.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't laughing.
Your wife lets you use the sharp scissors?
No, these are shop scissors.
Shop scissors.
To purchase a copy of this program, please call 1-800-823-7210 or visit our website, rsupublictv.org.
This week on the Woodturning Workshop, no, I'm not back in the kitchen. We're actually at the shop of Steve Worcester, who's going to show us how he makes his hollow vessels with slumped glass.
And we bring up the vacuum a little bit. Brought up a tailstock, and I'm going to cut away the waste wood.
What was the reason for this suit again?
Well, we just thought you'd look cute in it. We don't actually use that. We use a temperature-controlled kiln.